The day Mom's 17th love letter is listed on eBay, Dad, who is usually calm and easygoing, completely loses his temper. He calls Mom 3 times in a row. I just gave you $10,000 for the last love letter. How have you already spent it all? How many times do I have to repeat myself? Wendy just came back from 10 years in the future. She's emotionally unstable. If something happens to her because of all this nonsense, I'm going to hold you accountable. As Dad rages over the phone, I hold up my fingers and do the math. What is he talking about? The love letters are only $200 each. Mom takes me out for hamburgers every time she gets the money. But this time, she's sleeping too soundly. No matter how hard I try, I just can't wake her up. I'm hungry, Dad. Can you take me out for some hamburgers? Did your mom put you up to this? Dad asks, sounding slightly exasperated. She's doing everything she can to get my attention. A moment later, his voice softens. Stella, can you show me your mother's love letters? If you do, I'll take you out for hamburgers. Inside the bustling burger place, my dad, Jeremy Fisher, frowned as he stared at the 17 love letters that were neatly arranged in front of him. The look in his eyes felt unfamiliar. It looked nothing like the tender expression Mom always wore when she stared at those letters. A few seconds later, Dad sighed and gently patted my head. Once Wendy feels better, I'll pick both of you up and bring you home. Wendy is easy to get along with. She's nothing like your mom, who only knows how to threaten me with these love letters. My mom's name was Jillian Clinton. She once told me that Wendy Sutton was her best friend from college. Feeling confused, I'd asked, do I have to share my husband with my best friend? In that case, I don't want a best friend. Mom hadn't responded, but she'd suddenly looked like she was about to cry. On Mom's birthday, Wendy had flipped the cake over with tears in her eyes. Gripping Dad's hand, she cried, please send me away, Jeremy. I've seen what happens 10 years from now. Jillian went mad. She killed Colin and me with her own hands. For the rest of the day, Dad had stayed silent. He stood alone by the window, smoking one cigarette after another. When the morning came, Mom and I were sent away instead. Try to be more understanding, Jillian. Once Wendy's feeling better, I'll bring the both of you back home, Dad had said. Mom hadn't asked him for anything. The only thing she had taken with her were the love letters Dad had written to her. She took all 17 of them. Not a single one was left behind. When the light bulb in our new home broke, she sold one of the letters to Dad to pay for a replacement. When I needed a costume for my school play, she sold him another one. When winter came, and we needed a new quilt, she sold another. The love letters were neatly stacked inside a drawer. Within a year, we had to use 16 of them to keep our shabby little apartment from falling apart. I snapped back to reality and looked at Dad. With a small smile, I said, it's okay, Dad. Mom said that living on our own is actually pretty nice. She doesn't want to go back anymore. Dad froze for a moment. Then he let out a cold scoff. Your mother really went to great lengths to put that idea in your head. Just then his assistant, Thomas, leaned over to him and whispered, Miss Sutton found out about the love letters, Mr. Fisher. She's lost control of her emotions and is threatening to end her own life. Dad's expression instantly darkened. The next moment, he tore all 17 of Mom's love letters into pieces. Tell Wendy to stop crying. The letters are gone for good, he declared coldly. Tears streamed down my face as I frantically rushed forward to stop him. Don't tear them up. These mean a lot to Mom. I pleaded. She's been telling me these stories since I was little. Dad caressed my cheek, his face completely blank. They're nothing more than old memories. They don't mean anything anymore. He turned to Thomas and said, take Stella home, Thomas. I'm going to check on Wendy. I watched him walk away. Then I crouched down and carefully picked up the torn pieces of paper. As I placed every fragment into my bag, I couldn't stop myself from crying. These letters meant everything to Mom. I couldn't leave a single piece behind. When I returned home, the apartment was dark and quiet. I had saved half a hamburger for my mom. After placing it in her hand, I nuzzled my head against her cheek and said, here, Mom. You'll feel better once you've had something to eat. Whenever I got upset, Mom would take me to a restaurant to get hamburgers. My worries would always disappear immediately after I ate. But to my dismay, Mom didn't eat the burger. She didn't even say anything to me. Feeling upset, I instantly began to cry. Are you mad at me, Mom? I'm sorry. I shouldn't have brought the letters to the restaurant. I'll fix it. Please don't be mad. I turned on the table lamp and dumped all of the tiny paper scraps onto the table. Armed with nothing but a bottle of glue, I spent the entire night piecing the letters back together. My hands were covered in paper cuts, but I refused to stop. As I worked, the torn pieces of paper became stained with drops of blood. At dawn, I excitedly shook Mom's shoulders and exclaimed, I'm done, Mom. Can you wake up and take a look at me now? 3 seconds passed and Mom still didn't move. The hamburger I had brought home the day before had completely gone cold. My gaze drifted to the dead potted flower sitting on the windowsill. I felt a sudden ache in my chest. Dad had planted that flower for Mom himself. The two of them used to water and fertilize it together every single day. The plant had always produced strong, healthy flower buds, but the day after Mom moved out, Wendy threw a fit and hurled it downstairs. The flower pot shattered as it hit the ground, and the broken pieces even ended up injuring Mom's hand. Refusing to give up on the plant, Mom brought it home and replanted it. She watered and fertilized it all over again, but no matter how much she cared for it, it still drooped a little more every day. Then, on the day Mom fell asleep, it withered completely. "You have to wake up after I save the flower, okay, Mom?" I coaxed. I brought the plant to the florist next to our apartment building and begged the owner to help me save it. After I got there, the lady sighed and gently rubbed my head. "The roots are dead. I'm afraid the plant can't be saved anymore," she said regrettably. "Tell your mom to buy a new one, Stella. There's no point in holding on to this one." After a pause, she added, "Back then, your dad went all over Allister City to look for this plant so he could make your mom happy. Everyone in the neighborhood was incredibly jealous of her." I didn't respond and simply carried the flower pot back to the apartment. The sky was incredibly gloomy on my way home. Once I got back, I put the dead plant back on the balcony and glanced at Mom. Afterward, I pulled the entire plant out of the soil and tossed it into the trash. I then replaced it with the building block flower that Mom and Dad had gotten me for my birthday. Tears streamed down my face as I pulled on my mom's hand. "Look, Mom, the new flower I planted will never wither. I'm hungry. Are you hungry? Can we go get hamburgers together?" I cried. I added, "I don't want to go with Dad. Can we please go together instead?" Outside of our window, fireworks exploded in the sky. Shortly after, I heard the voices of our neighbors. "What a terrible man. He's ignoring his own wife and daughter while he celebrates another kid's birthday. I heard these fireworks cost $30,000. Jeremy really outdid himself." I hurried over to the window and pulled the curtains shut. If Mom saw the fireworks, she'd become upset again. Dad used to set off fireworks for her too. In the past, he'd light up the sky for her all night long. On top of that, he'd also buy her beautiful dresses that made her the belle of the ball. Pouting, I turned toward Mom and said, "It's okay, Mom. If Dad won't set off fireworks for you, I'll do it when I grow up." Moments later, I added, "I have a parent-teacher meeting tomorrow, Mom. Don't be late, okay?" Mom never showed up to my parent-teacher meeting. "It's obvious that your mom doesn't like you." Wendy's son, Colin Sutton, spat. "How could she let you wear such dirty clothes to an event like this?" Standing before me with a smug smile, he added, "You're a slob, Stella Fisher." I looked down at the clothes I had been wearing for the last 3 days. After Mom fell asleep, these were the cleanest clothes that I could find in our apartment. "Jeremy is my dad today. He's attending the parent-teacher meeting with me. He definitely doesn't want to see you or your mom. The two of you should just leave." Colin barked. My heart sank. Unable to suppress my anger, I gave Colin a shove, and he fell to the floor. "That's not true," I yelled. Our argument immediately escalated into a fight, and our cries instantly drew everyone's attention. Even though my stomach hurt terribly after he kicked me, I still held onto his hair tightly and refused to let go. Then a familiar voice rang out from the doorway. "Stella Fisher, what are you doing?" Dad was incredibly strong. He pushed me away from Colin, and before I knew it, I had already tumbled to the floor. My palms scraped against the tile and started to bleed. I got to my feet and stared at my dad in a daze. He used to be kind and gentle with me, and he would always fuss over the tiniest cuts and scrapes on my body. "Is this how your mother taught you to behave?" he snapped. Tears streamed down my face as I stared at him with a frown. Everything had changed since he met Wendy. One of the teachers hurried over to calm things down. Kids can be impulsive when they get upset. Besides, this wasn't entirely Stella's fault. You don't need to be so hard on her. Dad scoffed before crouching down to carefully examine Colin's injuries. "There's no need to defend her," he told the teacher. "I know her very well. She's just like her mother. She was born with a nasty temper." I tilted my head and glanced at him. I couldn't help but recall the things he wrote in Mom's love letters. In the past, he claimed that Mom was the kindest and most gentle woman in all of Allister City. He said that marrying her was the luckiest thing that had ever happened to him. Tears silently rolled down my face. Did grown-ups lie too? Even when the parent-teacher meeting was about to begin, Mom still hadn't shown up at my classroom door. Eventually, Dad stared at the empty seat next to me and appeared confused. "Mom has been asleep for days now. Can you call her and ask her to come to the parent-teacher meeting?" I asked. His expression turned grim as he hurriedly pulled out his phone. Just as he was about to make the call, his phone started to ring. Seconds later, Wendy's voice filled the air. "Doesn't Stella have a parent-teacher meeting today? Why is Jillian outside shopping? Do you want me to ask her to head over? Poor Stella is all alone. I feel bad for her," she said. Then she added, "I can't believe this. Jillian will do anything just to get your attention." "That won't be necessary," Dad replied in a cold voice. "These attention-seeking stunts of hers are becoming increasingly unreasonable." You can have the bracelet I bought for her. I should teach her a lesson after the amount of trouble she's caused. I stood frozen in place. I didn't tell him that Mom didn't care about his gifts anymore. In fact, she'd already thrown her engagement ring into the trash. After hanging up the phone, he looked me up and down coldly. You must have spent a lot of time rehearsing this little performance, Stella. Go home and tell your mother to stop wasting her time on these pointless tricks. Everything she's doing is only making me hate her more. I couldn't understand what Dad meant, but I instinctively teared up. Once the parent-teacher meeting was over, I stepped in front of him and blocked his way. Mom has been sleeping for a really long time, Dad. Can you take her to the hospital? I asked. She'll wake up if the doctor gives her some medicine. I promise I won't ask for those useless toys anymore. Dad didn't respond and let out a sigh. Before he could say anything, Colin snapped. No, he's taking me to the amusement park today. You're just like your mom. All you guys do is lie. Nobody likes either of you. My fingernails dug into the palm of my hands as I glanced at Dad with tear-filled eyes. He reached out to pat my head. Maybe some other time. Mom and I had lost count of how many times we'd heard that response. When Dad took Wendy and Colin on a winter trip overseas, he told us our trip could wait until some other time. When he treated them to fancy dinners, our plans were also pushed off to some other time. When it came to bringing us back to the Fisher residence, he still told us he'd do it some other time. I didn't understand what some other time meant, so I stepped in front of him and asked, does some other time mean never? I couldn't read his expression, but that day, he still drove me back to our old apartment building himself. Stella, if you promise not to help your mother lie from now on, I can like the two of you again. Next year, on your birthday, I'll bring you two back to the Fisher residence. I shook my head. I didn't lie. Mom said it's not good to tell lies. I added, Mom's just asleep. I broke open my piggy bank, but there were only $5 inside. The doctor said that it wasn't enough to buy medicine. That's what I thought of selling the love letter to you. You still haven't given me my $200, Dad. Dad's expression grew darker with each passing comment. Enough, Stella Fisher. He snapped. If you keep spewing nonsense, I'll ship you off to a boarding school. Maybe that'll straighten both you and your mother out. Frightened by his threats, I fell silent. I was picking on my fingers so much that I had nearly broken skin. Moments later, I saw a cloud of thick black smoke rising into the sky. The moment I got out of the car, I froze. The shabby little apartment Mom had patched up by selling her love letters was being swallowed by flames. What are you standing there for? Call the fire department, someone screamed. Panic flashed across Dad's face as he hurriedly tried to dial Mom's number. He called her 3 times in a row, but she never answered a single call. Standing before the roaring flames, Dad called Wendy with a grim expression on his face. Didn't you say you saw Jillian earlier? Tell her to go to the Fisher residence immediately, he screamed into the phone. I felt my heart drop. Oh, I see. He was looking for Mom. Smiling, I broke free from his hold and raced up the stairs toward the second floor. The flames singed my hair, but I pushed past the searing heat and kept making my way up. Dad immediately started to panic. His voice turned hoarse as he shouted, Stella Fisher, what are you trying to do? Get down here. I didn't turn around. I was acting as though I couldn't hear him at all. When I didn't listen to him, he desperately tried to grab me and lead me back downstairs to safety. Cut it out, Stella. Stop fooling around and come back downstairs. If you listen to me, I'll bring you and your mother back to the Fisher residence. How does that sound? The door was forced open with a loud bang. Mom was still lying motionlessly on the couch. I couldn't believe how unbothered she was. Look, Mom's right there. I wasn't lying. She's really asleep. I turned to look at my dad. Dad, why are you crying? The heat in the narrow hallway was suffocating, thick with the oily black smoke of burning linoleum and cheap particle board. Dad's hands were shaking violently as he stepped across the scorched threshold into our living room. He didn't look at the peeling wallpaper or the cracked plaster ceiling. His eyes were locked on the small, threadbare sofa by the window. Mom lay there on her side, one arm tucked beneath the fleece blanket we had bought with the third love letter. Her hair was draped across her face, completely still, untouched by the drafts of hot air swirling through the room. Jillian, Dad choked out. He lunged forward, falling to his knees beside the sofa. The wood groaned beneath his weight. Jillian, get up. The building is on fire. Stop playing this game. Get up and take Stella out. He grabbed her shoulder. The moment his fingers pressed into her linen shirt, Dad froze. A sound tore from his throat, a choked, strangled gasp, like a man whose lungs had just been crushed by a falling boulder. He pulled his hand back as if he had touched live voltage, staring down at his trembling palm in sheer, unadulterated horror. Mom didn't stir. Her body didn't yield to his touch with the soft warmth of a sleeping woman. She was rigid, cold. Her skin had the waxy grayish-blue pallor of stone left out in the winter rain. Dad, I asked, tugging on the hem of his soot-stained jacket. See? I told you. Mom wouldn't wake up no matter how many times I called her. I tried to feed her the burger, but she wouldn't open her mouth. Dad slowly turned his head toward me. His face was gray, tears carving clean, white lines through the soot on his cheeks. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and hollowed out by a terror so profound it seemed to rob him of speech. How long? Dad rasped, his voice cracking into jagged pieces. Stella, how many days has she been like this? I held up 4 fingers. 4 days. Since Tuesday morning. Her hands got really cold, so I pulled the blanket over her. But then the light bulb broke and I didn't have money to buy medicine, so I went to find you. The realization hit Jeremy Fisher with the force of a physical blow. He leaned over the sofa, wrapping his arms around Mom's stiffened frame, and let out an agonizing, animalistic roar of grief that echoed above the roaring flames. No. Hien, no. Wake up. Look at me. He buried his face in her cold neck, sobbing hysterically, his tears soaking into her collar. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Jillian, please. I'll buy the house back. I'll throw Wendy out. I'll do anything. Just open your eyes. A wooden ceiling beam cracked above us, showering sparks and burning embers. Across the room. Sir, get out of here. The roof is coming down. A firefighter in a yellow helmet shouted, kicking the ruined door open with an iron crowbar. 2 firefighters rushed inside, grabbing Dad by his shoulders to haul him backward. Let go of me. That's my wife. Dad screamed, thrashing against them like a madman, his hands clawing at Mom's blanket. Jillian. Jillian. One of the firefighters touched Mom's neck for half a second, then looked at his partner with grim, sorrowful eyes. She's gone, man. Rigor mortis has already passed into secondary flaccidity. She's been dead for days. Shut up. Shut your mouth. She's not dead. Dad roared, punching the firefighter's chest plate. They tackled him to the floor, pinning his arms, while another paramedic scooped me into his arms and carried me toward the stairs. As we were rushed down the smoky stairwell, I looked over the paramedic's shoulder. Through the haze of orange flames, I saw my mother's building block flower, the one I had planted in the soil to replace Dad's dead plant, sitting quietly on the windowsill. It didn't burn. It just watched us leave, smiling in the dark. The fluorescent lights of the hospital emergency corridor buzzed with a low electrical hum. I sat on a metal bench with a blue hospital blanket wrapped around my shoulders, my small legs dangling above the linoleum floor. A nurse had gently washed the soot from my face and bandaged the scraped palms I got when Dad pushed me to the ground at school. On the plastic tray beside me sat a cup of warm milk and an untouched plate of chicken nuggets. Down the hall, behind the frosted glass doors of the forensic pathology unit, Dad sat on the floor, his back pressed against the wall, his head buried between his knees. His expensive suit was ruined, the sleeves torn, the fabric smelling of smoke and ash. His hands were blistered from the burning doorway, but he refused to let the nurses treat them. The frosted glass door opened with a soft hiss. Dr. Kenneth Evans, the senior coroner, stepped out holding a metal clipboard. He looked at Dad with eyes hardened by 30 years of witnessing human tragedy, devoid of any professional warmth. Jeremy Fisher? Dad scrambled to his feet so fast he nearly tripped over his own pant legs. Lunged toward the doctor, gripping Dr. Evans's white coat with frantic, blistered hands. How is she? Can you revive her? I have money. I have 20 million in corporate liquid assets. Call the best surgeons from Capital City. I'll pay for everything. Dar. Evans pulled Dad's hands off his coat with cold, clinical firmness. Mr. Fisher, your wife has been dead for at least 96 hours. Dad froze, his breath catching in his throat. Cause of death, Dr. Evans read from the autopsy report, his voice flat and cutting, was acute myocarditis compounded by severe bilateral lobar pneumonia, chronic malnutrition, and extreme physical exhaustion. The doctor looked up from his clipboard, his jaw tightening. Her stomach contained nothing but trace amounts of plain tap water and half a slice of stale white bread. Her body mass index was in the severe starvation category. She had an untreated lung infection for over 3 weeks that caused high fevers and agonizing pleural pain. Starvation? Dad whispered, his eyes wide and uncomprehending. No, that's impossible. I sent her $10,000 every month. Every time she listed a love letter, I transferred $10,000 to her account. Dr. Evans let out a dry, contemptuous breath. I don't know what you transferred, Mr. Fisher. But the child told the social worker that they lived on $200 a month. The mother would buy 2 boxes of discount macaroni, pay $50 for the communal electric meter, and spend the remaining balance on second-hand clothes and school supplies for the little girl. Dr. Evans stepped closer, towering over Dad. For 4 days, your 7-year-old daughter lived alone in that freezing apartment with her mother's corpse. She thought her mother was just sleeping. Because she was tired. She tried to feed her a hamburger. When the light went out, she sat in the dark gluing pieces of paper together because she thought if she fixed the love letters you tore up, her mother would wake up. The doctor pulled a clear plastic evidence bag from under his arm and slammed it onto the metal bench beside me. Inside the plastic bag were the 17 love letters. They were covered in thick, smeared strips of craft glue. The edges were uneven, crooked, and jagged, and scattered across every single torn seam were dozens of tiny rust-colored smudges. My dried blood from the paper cuts on my fingers. Dad looked at the plastic bag. He fell to his knees on the hospital floor with a wet, heavy thud. He didn't cry out. He didn't scream. He simply opened his mouth and a torrent of dark, bile-stained vomit poured out onto the polished white floorboards as his mind shattered under the weight of what he had done. At 8 p.m., the elevator doors at the end of the corridor chimed. Wendy Sutton walked out, holding a designer leather handbag, wearing a pale lavender cashmere coat. Her 10-year-old son Colin walked beside her happily, licking a chocolate ice cream cone. When Wendy saw Dad kneeling on the floor surrounded by hospital security and nurses, a look of theatrical distress immediately flooded her features. "Jeremy," Wendy gasped, rushing forward, her eyes instantly brimming with delicate, practiced tears. "Oh, thank God you're safe. Thomas told me the apartment building caught fire. I was having such severe panic attacks. The future vision I had was so terrifying. I saw you burning." "Shut up," Dad whispered. Wendy stopped mid-step, blinking in confusion. "Jeremy? What did you say?" Dad slowly raised his head. His face was unrecognizable. His skin was gray, his cheeks hollow, and his dark eyes were hollowed out by a bottomless, venomous darkness that made Wendy instinctively take a step back. "I said," Dad spoke, his voice dropping into a terrifying, gravelly register. "Shut your mouth." Colin crossed his arms, frowning at Dad. "Why are you yelling at my mom? You promised you'd take me to the toy store after the meeting. Stella is the one who lit. Stella pushed me." "Thomas," Dad called out without looking away from Wendy. His personal assistant, Thomas, who had just stepped out of the stairwell, holding a thick manila folder, walked forward with his head bowed, his hands trembling. "Mr. Fisher." Thomas stammered, his face pale as paper. I brought the complete banking records you requested from the private client division." "Read them," Dad commanded. "Mr. Fisher, please," Wendy interrupted, her voice rising in pitch as she tried to reach for Dad's arm. "You're in shock. Let's go home to the Fisher estate. The doctor can give you a sedative." "Read them, Thomas," Dad roared, the sound echoing through the hospital ward like a gunshot. Thomas flinched, opened the folder with shaking fingers, and began to read. On October 12, Mr. Fisher authorized a wire transfer of $10,000. For the first letter, the destination account was changed via an administrative override submitted by Ms. Wendy Sutton, routing $9,800 to Ms. Sutton's offshore holding account in the Cayman Islands, with only $200 deposited into Mrs. Gillian Fisher's debit card. On November 3, the second letter, $9,800 routed to Ms. Sutton's luxury vehicle lease account, $200 to Mrs. Fisher. On December 1, the third letter, $9,800 to Ms. Sutton's private jewelry vault, $200 to Mrs. Fisher. Thomas flipped through 16 identical transaction logs. "In total," Thomas whispered, $156,800 was embezzled by Ms. Sutton over the past 12 months. Mrs. Fisher received exactly $3,200. The hospital corridor fell into absolute, deafening silence. Wendy's face turned from pale to translucent. She clutched her designer handbag to her chest, her breathing turning shallow and frantic. "Jeremy, listen to me," Wendy pleaded, her voice trembling. "It was for our future. In the timeline I saw, Gillian used that money to hire assassins to kill Colin and me. I only took the money to protect us. You believe me, don't you? I came back from 10 years in the future. I saved your life." Dad stood up slowly, towering over her. He looked at the woman he had treated like a fragile prophet for 18 months, the woman for whom he had cast his lawful wife and 7-year-old child out into a rodent-infested tenement. "Where is the time machine, Wendy?" Dad asked, his voice chillingly calm. "What? You said you came back from 10 years in the future," Dad said, stepping closer, until his shadow completely engulfed her. "Show me the temporal coordinates. Show me the neuroscans. Show me a single shred of proof that isn't your lying, filthy tongue." Before Wendy could speak, 2 plainclothes detectives from the Major Crimes Division stepped out from behind the nurse's station. Detective Miller held up an official search warrant and a transparent evidence bag containing a faded, cloth-bound notebook. Wendy Sutton, Detective Miller announced, his voice ringing with cold authority. You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, identity theft, and criminal child endangerment resulting in death. Wendy shrieked, backing away until she hit the wall. No, you can't arrest me. I'm a victim. Jeremy, tell them. Detective Miller held up the cloth-bound notebook. We executed a search warrant on your suite at the Fisher residence 2 hours ago, Miller said, looking at Dad. We found this in her floor safe. Mr. Fisher, do you recognize this handwriting? Dad reached out with a trembling, blistered hand, taking the notebook from the detective. The cover was embroidered with faded blue hydrangeas. On the first page, written in neat, elegant blue ink, was a signature. Gillian Clinton, freshman year, Department of Literature, 2012. It was Mom's private college journal. Dad flipped through the yellowed pages with wide, disbelieving eyes. Page 42. Jeremy brought me roasted chestnuts on the library steps today. It was snowing so hard his eyelashes were white. He said if we ever have a daughter, we should name her Stella, after the constellation we saw in the winter sky. Page 89. Wendy asked to borrow my sweater again. She always looks at Jeremy with strange eyes when he comes to pick me up. Sometimes I feel uneasy around her, but she is my best friend. I should trust her. Page 114. Jeremy proposed to me by the river. He bought 17 paper lanterns and wrote a promise on every single one. He told me that even if the world ended, he would write 17 love letters every year to remind me that I am his home. Dad fell against the wall, clutching the diary to his chest, his breath coming in ragged, bloody gasps. There was no time travel. There was no vision of the future. There was no prophetic warning. Wendy Sutton had simply stolen Jillian's college diary from our attic 3 years ago. She had memorized every private memory, every secret conversation, every intimate promise Jeremy had ever made to Jillian in their youth, and weaponized them to stage an elaborate, psychopathic con. She had played on Jeremy's secret anxieties, his protective instincts, and his arrogance, manufacturing a future prophecy that allowed her to systematically strip Jillian of her husband, her home, her dignity, and her life. You stole her memories, Dad whispered, looking at Wendy with eyes that held no humanity left, only the black, fathomless void of a man who had murdered his own soul. Jeremy, I did it because I loved you. Wendy screamed, tears of pure terror spilling down her face as the detectives clicked steel handcuffs around her wrists. Jillian didn't deserve you. She was weak. She was boring. I made you feel like a hero. Look at Colin, he's your boy. You love Colin. He's not my son, Dad said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. The DNA test Thomas ran this morning confirmed he belongs to your ex-husband in New Jersey. Colin dropped his ice cream cone onto the floor, bursting into loud, terrified wails as the social workers stepped forward to take him by the arm. Take them away, Dad said, turning his back on them. If she ever gets bail, Thomas, ensure the private prosecution team files 40 separate counts of felony fraud. I want her to rot in maximum security until she is 80 years old. Wendy was dragged down the hallway, her shrill, hysterical shrieks echoing against the ceramic tiles until the heavy fire doors swung shut, cutting off the noise forever. The hospital chapel was quiet, illuminated only by the soft amber glow of votive candles. I sat on the front wooden pew, holding the half-eaten, cold hamburger in my lap. I didn't want to throw it away. Mom hadn't eaten it yet, and I was taught never to waste food. The heavy oak door creaked open. Dad walked down the center aisle. He had washed his face, but his skin looked paper-thin, his eyes bloodshot and swollen shut. In his hands he held the 17 love letters that had been released from police evidence. He sat down on the floor right beside my knees, cross-legged on the cold stone pavers. With trembling fingers, he laid out the first letter on the pew beside me. The paper was torn into 24 pieces, held together by yellow craft glue, and smeared with my dried blood. Dad touched the handwriting on the page. It was his own script from 7 years ago. My dearest Jillian, when you walk into a room, the noise of the world goes quiet. If I ever lose my way, if I ever become a man you cannot recognize, take this letter and remind me who I was when I loved you. A single tear dripped from Dad's chin, splashing onto the glued paper seam. He laid out the second letter. My sweet Jillian, today Stella was born. Her eyes are dark and bright, just like yours. I swear on my life that neither of you will ever know hunger, cold, or loneliness. I will build a fortress around our family. Dad laid out the third. To my wife, the light bulb in our kitchen broke today, and you laughed when I dropped the ladder. As long as I have breath in my body, you will never sit in the dark. One by one, Jeremy Fisher laid out all 17 letters across the wooden pew. Every single letter was a promise he had made. Every single letter was a fortress he had promised to build. and every single letter had been sold back to him for $200 just so his wife and child could buy a light bulb, a winter blanket, and a school costume. Dad pulled the plastic container of glue from his pocket. He picked up a tiny, stray scrap of paper from the bottom of the evidence bag, a piece of the 17th letter that I had missed, and tried to glue it to the margin. His hands were shaking so violently that the paper tore further. I can't fix it, Dad sobbed, dropping his head onto my knees, his broad shoulders heaving with uncontrollable agony. Stella, Daddy can't fix it. The letters are broken. Mom's words are broken. I looked down at the back of his head. I remembered when I was 4 years old, Dad would carry me on his shoulders through the botanical gardens. He had felt like the tallest, strongest mountain in the world. Now looking at him curled at my feet, he looked smaller than the building blocks in my toy box. It's okay, Dad, I said softly, patting his graying hair with my bandaged hand. You don't have to fix them anymore. Dad looked up, his eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic glimmer of hope. Stella, do you forgive Daddy? Daddy will take you home. I bought 20 boxes of building blocks. I bought all the flowers in Alistair City. We can go home. Right now. I looked into his eyes and shook my head with a small, polite smile. Mom said that when a plant's roots are dead, you have to throw it in the trash. There's no point in holding on to it. I pointed to the plastic trash bin near the chapel door. The letters are dead, Dad. Mom is dead. And I don't want to go to the Fisher residence anymore. The day of Mom's funeral was gray and drizzling, the autumn mist clinging to the green hills of Oak Ridge Cemetery. Dad had spared no expense. He had bought the most prestigious burial plot on the highest crest of the hill, overlooking the ocean. The entire path was lined with 10,000 imported white Casablanca lilies, Mom's favorite flower from her university days. A white marble mausoleum had been constructed in 72 hours, with Mom's name carved in deep, gold leaf lettering. Jillian Clinton Fisher, the only light of my life, wait for me in the sun. Dozens of business partners, city officials, and distant relatives stood under black umbrellas, whispering among themselves in somber tones. Dad stood beside the open vault, wearing a black morning suit, holding a massive bouquet of fresh lilies. He had lost 20 pounds in a single week. His cheekbones protruded sharply, his skin sallow, his hands permanently wrapped in white medical gauze from his burns. I stood 5 paces away, holding the hand of my maternal grandmother, Eleanor Clinton, who had flown in from Seattle the night before. Grandmother's face was made of stone. She had refused to let Dad pay for the casket, refused to speak to him at the funeral home, and refused to let him touch me. When the minister concluded the final prayer, Dad stepped forward toward the polished mahogany casket. Jillian, Dad whispered, his voice cracking into a dry, hollow whistle. Reached out to lay the bouquet of lilies onto the wood. Don't touch her, Grandmother Eleanor said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the rain with the sharpness of a straight razor. Dad froze, his hands hovering over the casket. Eleanor, please. She is my wife. Let me say goodbye to my wife. She stopped being your wife the day you forced her into a slum to buy peace from a sociopath, Grandmother said, stepping between Dad and the casket. You don't get to lay flowers on her grave, Jeremy. You don't get to play the grieving widower for your business associates. Grandmother took the massive bouquet of lilies from Dad's hands and tossed it onto the wet grass outside the canopy, where the heavy rain immediately began to batter the delicate white petals into the mud. Stella, Grandmother called softly. I walked forward, holding a small plastic building block flower that I had assembled that morning. I reached out and placed the plastic flower onto the center of the mahogany wood. Goodbye, Mom, I whispered. I'm going to Seattle with Grandma. The houses there have big windows, and Grandma said the heaters never break. I stepped back and took Grandmother's hand. Dad dropped to his knees in the wet grass, reaching his bandaged hands toward me. Stella, don't leave Daddy, he wept, his tears mixing with the rain streaming down his face. You're all I have left. I'll give up the company. I'll move to Seattle. I'll buy a house next door. Please, just look at Daddy once. I didn't turn around. I held Grandmother's warm, dry hand tightly as we walked down the gravel path, our black umbrella shielding us from the rain. Behind us, on the crest of the hill, Jeremy Fisher knelt alone in the mud beside the marble tomb, his agonizing, broken cries swallowed whole by the vast, indifferent roar of the ocean wind. 2 years later, in the most affluent residential district of Alistair City, the Fisher residence stood behind high wrought iron gates, surrounded by 5 acres of manicured gardens. Inside the 3-story mansion, there were no maids, no cooks, and no guests. The vast living room was dark, the heavy velvet drapes permanently drawn shut. The only light came from 17 small glass display cases mounted along the marble walls. Inside each glass case sat a single, painstakingly restored love letter, preserved in museum-grade argon gas, to prevent the paper from decaying. On the glass of each case, a small brass plaque was engraved with a single number, 1 through 17. Jeremy Fisher sat on the floor in the center of the room, wearing a faded linen shirt that had once belonged to Jillian. His hair was completely white at 34 years of age. His body was gaunt, his hands permanently scarred by burned tissue. On the mahogany coffee table in front of him sat a fresh, warm hamburger from the burger place down the street, a glass of warm milk, and a small potted hydrangea that he watered 3 times a day. His phone vibrated on the glass table. It was an email notification from his private investigator in Seattle. Subject: Quarterly Report. Stella Clinton. Stella completed 3rd grade with highest honors in mathematics and visual arts. She participated in the school soccer league this spring. Her health is excellent. Enclosed are 4 photographs taken from the public park perimeter. Jeremy picked up the phone with trembling, reverent fingers. He clicked on the attached image. The photograph showed a 9-year-old girl with long, dark hair tied in a cheerful ponytail, wearing a bright yellow raincoat, laughing as she ran across a green park lawn chasing a golden retriever. Her cheeks were rosy, her eyes sparkling with radiant, unshadowed joy. There was no fear in her face. There were no paper cuts on her fingers. And there was not a single trace of the little girl who had lived for 4 days in a burning, freezing room with a corpse. Jeremy touched the screen with his scarred thumb, a single silent tear tracking down his weathered cheek. "She's happy," he whispered to the empty room. "Jillian, she's so happy." He set the phone down. He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, pulled the heavy drape aside by 2 inches, and looked up at the night sky. Outside, above the towering skyline of Alistair City, fireworks began to explode. In celebration of the new year, brilliant bursts of crimson, gold, and sapphire, illuminating the clouds for miles around. Jeremy watched the light bloom and die against the dark glass. He knew that $30,000 of fireworks could light up an entire city's sky. He knew that $20 million could buy any mansion on Earth. And he knew, with the cold, absolute certainty of a damned soul, that all the money, all the fireworks, and all the tears in the universe could never buy back a single second of the warmth he had thrown into the dark. He pulled the curtain shut, sealing the room in absolute, unbroken blackness, and sat down alone in the dark to wait for a morning that would never come. 10 years later, on a bright, sun-drenched morning in Seattle, the graduation ceremony of the University of Washington School of Architecture was in full swing. I sat in the front row of the graduating class, wearing a black academic gown and a gold honors stole. My cap was tilted slightly back, my hair blowing gently in the cool breeze coming off Puget Sound. Grandmother Eleanor sat in the VIP pavilion, smiling proudly, wiping a tear of joy from behind her spectacles. After the ceremony, as we were packing my drawing folios into the trunk of Grandmother's car, she handed me a small, polished cedar box with a brass latch. "Your mother gave this to me before she married Jeremy," Grandmother said softly. "She told me that if anything ever happened to her, I should give it to you on the day you became an adult." I took the box. The cedar smelled sweet, rich, and clean, like rain falling on dry pine needles. I lifted the brass latch and opened the lid. Inside was no building block toy, no dried flowers, and no legal documents. There was only a single, unsealed envelope containing a sheet of heavy cream stationery, written in Mom's clean, graceful hand. It was the 18th letter. The one she had never listed on eBay. The one she had never sold for $200. To my beloved Stella. If you are reading this, it means you have grown into a tall, brilliant, beautiful woman who can stand firmly on her own 2 feet. I want you to know that your existence was never an accident, and your life was never a burden. You were the only real magic I ever found in this world. Do not carry my sorrow into your future. Do not look back at the dark rooms we lived in, and do not hate the man who wrote the first 17 letters. Pity him, my sweet girl. Pity him because he traded an ocean of real love for a cup of painted water, and he will spend the rest of his life dying of thirst. Go forward, Stella. Build houses that are full of windows. Plant flowers that bloom in the sun. And remember that you were loved with every single beat of my heart, from the moment you opened your eyes until the moment I closed mine. With all my eternal love, Mom. I looked up from the letter. Above me, the sky over Puget Sound was a vast, crystalline, boundless blue. The morning sun shone down, warm and golden, sinking deep into my skin, into my bones, into my untainted, unburdened heart. I smiled, folded the 18th letter, and tucked it safely against my chest. The wind blew warm and free, carrying no smoke, no regrets, and no ashes, only the infinite, beautiful promise of the road ahead.